Good afternoon, my name is Guillermina Fano, and it has been a pleasure to take this class of translation as a teaching tool, and I hope to reflect that in this last video as a final project. First, I would like to start by saying that translation as a second language acquisition tool is used in the cross-lingual dimension of language teaching. It can help us check on three aspects of learning: accuracy, awareness of content and forms, and it is also a means for confirming or refuting hypotheses that students have formed about the target language. Teachers have to be aware that using translation as a teaching tool is not the same as teaching professional translation. In the former case, it requires a previous proficiency in both the source language and the target language. Therefore, in an EFL class, the activities have to be in the corresponding level of the students. The aim of the task has to be clear. As any other task in the classroom, the translation must be done for specific purposes. As mentioned previously, the objectives can be checking correct understanding, contrasting content and form, and testing the hypothesis created by the students. In my experience, I would like to talk about a specific grammar form that's been giving me problems in the last semesters, and I think that I finally found the best way to overcome it. This topic is the past perfect, to explain that something happened in the past before another action also in the past, which students find it very, very difficult. So here's the example that I have in my book. One of the examples that I have in the textbook, which says, Joe had left the restaurant when I finally arrived. Students, wanted or not, they tend to translate what they are learning, so they put it in their mind as Joe hubo dejado el restaurante cuando yo finalmente llegué. So now incorporating this translating tool, I would say that students, if we do the actual translation, they would be able to see first the contrast in the form. In Spanish, we don't say hubo dejado, so there is no literal equivalence to this from English to Spanish. And I think that the best translation on this sentence would be Joe se había ido del restaurante cuando llegué. So it will help them to understand the forms or the moments where we use this grammatical form. It would also help them to understand that there isn't always an exact translation, but there is an equivalent in the language, and in consequence they can understand better when to use this form, and in any case they will either prove or refute the hypothesis that they have done previously about this topic. Well, the process to be followed would be first to summarize the main idea of the text that's going to be translated. Then they are going to have to translate the text, and finally they will have the opportunity to compare their translation with a partner or with a team to analyze the real language. It is important to mention that the best friend in a translation would be a dictionary, so they would be encouraged to use it. Also, in these classes, when we did the translation classes, more than the dictionary, I used a thesaurus, because sometimes we actually understand the meaning of the word, but the exact word that comes to our mind is not exactly the one that you want to use in that moment. It doesn't sound natural, so the thesaurus would help them find the best way to express it in the target language or in our mother language to have a natural outcome. I think that in order to have a successful translation in class as a tool, the objectives to use it have to be very clear. They have to be expressed to the students why you are asking them to translate, so they know what kind of outcome we are looking for. More than the perfect translation, it's something that would help them understand better the target language. The process of the translation has to be explained clearly and properly, and of course the teacher has to be supervising them at all times, and also we have to encourage them to have their necessary tools, which would be a dictionary, very good dictionary, because sometimes the ones that are used in the class or in class don't have all the meanings that are looking for. One example would be that recently during this course I tried to incorporate an activity to my students, and I asked them to translate a text that would say that it was 4 stories told, talking about the dictionary. And of course, that the only meaning that they found about stories was historias, which they asked me, teacher, historias? And I just told them, does that make sense? And they said, no, well, think, it's talking about height, what would make sense? So finally, after some guidance and everything, they came up with the idea that they were talking about a building that was 4 pisos de alto, so the dinosaur was actually very tall, like 12 meters or so. So, and of course, well, like I said, we need to follow them closely to have a nice and a good and a successful class for the translation, since we actually are not teaching them to be translators, but we want them to see the contrast, the different meanings, and that sometimes there is not an equivalent, so they have to find an approximation in meaning without altering the original meaning of the text. Personally, this class of translation has been very helpful to me, because I have been very close-minded about translating in class. I try to encourage my students to think in English instead of trying to translate everything, which I am still convinced is the best thing. However, now I don't see translation as a bad habit, but as a tool that can be incorporated in everyday class. Maybe not every day, but as one of the resources that we teachers have for showing students different aspects of language. And finally, to express the difficulties I had in this class, well, I don't mean to be cocky, I just think that I didn't have many difficulties. The class was very interesting. It was like not exactly mind-blowing, but close, because like I said, I was very, very close-minded about having translation incorporated in class. So that has been very helpful. And as per language, what I found is that, like I mentioned before, sometimes it's not that you don't understand it, but since we are used to think in English already, sometimes we don't have the closest approximation of the word in a specific text that would sound naturally in our target language, or in my case, in my mother language, because the translations were from English to Spanish. So I really appreciate this class. It's been very helpful, and I think I'm gonna use it from now on.